Hello and welcome to our special podcast reviewing episode by episode Over the Garden Wall, or as Chris described it on a recent episode of Steven University, Under the Garden Hedge. which
yeah, my bad.
Which was amazing. I mean, it's like so correct, but so not correct all at once. For those of you who've stumbled across this but don't know who we are or what this is or what this channel is, we've been doing a podcast on this YouTube channel called Steven University where we've been reviewing episode by episode Steven Universe, and we have run out of episodes. So I mean, it's true. We've done 100
hiatus.
We're on hiatus time. So as a result, we've decided it'd be fun to sort of tackle something else. We don't want to tackle anything too lengthy, like like an Adventure Time or a Last Airbender, or because Steven Universe may come back shortly, and we don't want to be sort of halfway through another thing, and then the two are sort of happening at once, and it's a whole thing. So we chose a show that I'm very fond of and Chris hasn't seen. Now, for those of you who don't know the basic premise of Steven University or the podcast, the initial conceit was that Chris isn't a big fan of animation, so I was trying to get him into a show, and not only that, but I took the challenge of getting him into one of the shows that is one of the hardest to get into, but has such a great payoff if you're patient with it, And that was the challenge with Steven Universe, and over 150 episodes, I've slowly, well, not that slowly, really. I mean, for the majority of it, I would say Chris has been on board. So that's been a really neat experience. If you want to experience that, that's elsewhere on the channel. But this is going to be a similar thing in that I have already seen and absolutely love Over the Garden Wall. I've only ever seen it the once, so I was super excited for the excuse to see it again. I don't know why I've never seen it again. It's 10 episodes. I really could have and should have, but live and learn. Because I'd forgotten a lot of the details until I started. We just watched episode 1 basically, and we're going to discuss it now. So, I mean, again, I'm very fond of this, but I totally get that the first episode, like with Steven Universe, doesn't really show its hand in terms of what it can do, and it really, for me, highlights that we always compliment Steven Universe on achieving a lot in 10 minutes. But it's easy to forget that the reason Steven Universe does that is because it spends so much of its runtime every episode setting up so much stuff that they can just dip into certain things with so minimal effort, with so minimal setup, that they can achieve a lot in a short space of time because they've done the legwork already. And I think watching this feels the same way. There's a lot of depth to come, but this is the legwork. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so, I think a lot of people who listen to Steven University got a lot of joy at my bitterness and resentment in the early episodes, because you were forcing me to watch a show that I just didn't get. And I kind of came into this going, well, I won't be as bitter and resentful because I will know from Steven Universe what can be achieved with animation, what can be achieved in 10 minutes an episode, and I have a better example of the expectation. And then there's just a piano playing frog, and I was like, oh dear. And I then, as it went on, I think partly because I'm assuming the old dude is played by Christopher Lloyd.
Yes, he is.
And Back to the Future is one of my favourite films, if not my favourite film, potentially. So there was a warmth to hearing that voice, and that maybe softened my cold animation heart. And I did not get into it by any stretch, but I did I don't think I was as angry as predicted, as I was at the first episode of Steven Universe. But I shared its confusion. But I think, to its credit, what's quite nice is, and I used this comparison with another show on our other podcast, Nothing But Static, the other day. I like when shows have the ballsiness to do what The Wire set a precedent for, which is just, it doesn't try and explain anything particularly. It's just, this is the world you're in. It's the it was the I was talking about it when I've just started watching The Handmaid's Tale, and I was sort of my partner Jess gets annoyed when she doesn't have answers, whereas I don't mind it because I'm like, well, the show will slowly explain it to us, and we'll just have to kind of get used to it. And I felt that this show did that. It was just like, well, this is the world, and it will all make sense eventually, more than Steven Universe, because Steven Universe was just batshit crazy, and it.
So you felt more confident about this show watching the pilot than with Steven Universe?
Possibly, but I don't think it's fair to say that outright because Steven Universe will have had an influence on that.
That's exactly you've just you've just hit the point I was going to hit, which is do you think that seeing the potential of one of these shows and seeing how wisely really. Because obviously, if you try to explain a complex world in 10 minutes and tell a story, well, you're fucked. It's not going to be good. It's going to be very bad. So what I love is that these animated shows have had to resort to different tactics than traditional half-hour shows or 40-minute shows, and how they have done that is simply by just holding back and drip feeding you the information because, God, if there's a true info dump right up top, you're not going to watch any further. It's just not possible. And I think there's an element maybe of you sort of see that a bit more now, having experienced Steven Universe. So you're finding yourself being a bit more open to it.
I couldn't. Sorry, man. My phone I cut out most of that, and I tried telling you, but I don't think you heard me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
So sorry, you're gonna have to edit that. So brief summary of what you're saying.
I was sort of saying that, like, you know, they don't have the luxury of a 42-minute show or a half an hour show of being able to set the whole world up in that. They open with 10 minutes, and if they were really to spend their entire time doing the exposition and setting up the world, they'd be fucked because you can't do that and tell a story. So what I was saying was sort of, these shows have their hands have been forced, if they want to be complex, to drip feed it, because you can't just dump it all in the first episode. It would be gibberish, it would be no story. It would just be an info dump. So I think they found this strategy by necessity, I think it's a requirement for these shows to sort of drip feed the information, but it does work really well when it's done well.
The only thing what's interesting to me about this is the only hook they really give you is what the old man says. The idea there's a big beast out there and get out of the woods if you can. Because fundamentally, the dog attacks, the dog is dealt with, and they do quite a good job of making me go. They did a better job, and again, it probably is hindered by knowing from Steven Universe just what can be done. But I feel like they did a better job of making me going, I wonder what these woods are about then, and I wonder what this beast is about, than Steven Universe did, making me go, oh, I wonder what these gems are about. But I think that's partly because they didn't really even call them gems. It was so, like I say, I think this has clearer questions, and those clearer questions are a bit more enticing. And, apologies for anyone listening to this without listening to anything we've ever done. And they're like, why is he comparing it to Steven Universe or so much? That's just going to kind of happen. But I think at the moment, the most compelling thing is, what are these woods about? And who are these two as well? And why, like, when the beast was attacking and in certain shots, they seemed quite small. So are they just young children? I couldn't work out whether they were smaller than your average children and whether that was important. I couldn't, but I'm able to kind of go meta that a bit more than, well, where are they? What's going on? One of them was referenced getting their heart broken. What does that mean? Why has he got a teapot on his head?
Yeah,
I think because I know it builds to something, and I know it's only 10 episodes. I'm more like, and I had a reputation on Steven University for getting things. I feel this desire to be like, teapot, okay, teapot. Who has teapots? Tea leaves. Maybe they're tea bags. Maybe they're walking tea bags. Maybe this isn't a woods. Maybe they're in a kettle. Like maybe that old dude's lime scale. Maybe that's the beast. The plug, it gets turned on. I don't. Obviously, it's not that. But I'm wondering if I'm overthinking
you were sifting
that.
for answers because you want to maintain a reputation that you've grown. For those who don't listen to other podcasts, Chris has got a reputation for being able to predict the show ahead of time. He's done that both on our other podcast, Fringe Observers, and Steven Universe. Do you think then, like, the question I have for you, I suppose, at this stage is, would this be enough to watch more for you, even now in this world, like in a world where you've seen Steven Universe and understand, like, that animation can really build to something really interesting and thought provoking? Was this enough for you, or was this still not enough of a grip for you to want to watch more?
Yes, but because I know it's 10 episodes. It's less than 2 hours. So if I had a day off coming up, if suddenly you were like, actually, I don't want to do this podcast, and I didn't have to watch it, yes, because it's less than 2
like
hours.
A movie.
If I, it's bank holiday weekend coming up, if Jess is out, because I'd never be able to convince her, she didn't even like Disenchantment and Final Space. So, if I had a couple of hours to myself, I think I'd be tempted, yes, because so many people have said such good things that I'd want to know what the fuss was about. But I think my yes is more a reflection on wanting to know what the fuss is about, knowing it's short, and the baggage from Steven Universe.
So the lack of commitment required it gives it bonus points out of the gate, because you don't have to watch 150 episodes.
Yeah, and that's slightly, so the show hasn't necessarily done that.
The circumstances.
But I am intrigued. I am intrigued as to what's going on. But I think it's a case of being intrigued about what's going on and knowing that it's a satisfying answer and a good answer. Mm-hmm. So therefore, if I didn't know that, who knows?
Yeah, I think you'll be satisfied with where it goes.
I tell you what, as well, actually, I did think it was off the bat funnier than Steven Universe was at the beginning as well. I thought there was some, the stuff about the candy trail, and that then being what led the beast to them. I thought there was some really good jokes in it. There
were a couple of mostly related to the kid Greg, but yeah, the jokes are strong in this show.
But where he's like, I'm gonna call. Is it Wirt?
Wirt, yeah, WIRT.
Yeah, he's like,
Wirt.
I'm gonna call him Wirt, but I'm called Wirt. That's fine. I'll call you something like that. Was really funny. Is one of them Elijah Wood, by the way?
Yes,
as well?
Correct. Wirt is Elijah Wood. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, okay, so let's get into some of the details. Well, the basic story of the episode, for those who don't remember, we should have really done this up front, but the basic story of this first episode is they're lost in the woods. They come across a woodsman who warns them of a beast. Greg has been leaving a sweet trail behind him because of an offhand comment Wirt made. There's a running theme in this episode of Wirt starting to come up with a plan, being a bit indecisive, deciding against it, but Greg carrying it out anyway. In fact, one of my favourite jokes in the episode is when they then arrive with this house, they find this woodsman, and he's like, you'll be safe in here. This sort of monster comes through the door, and then immediately, carrying out a plan, joke sort of half referenced by Wirt earlier, Greg knocks out the woodsman.
Yeah, that was very funny.
It's so good. So they're chased by the beast. Eventually, it falls into the sort of the water wheel on the side of the mill, and something is squeezed out of its mouth, and it turns back into a normal dog. A few details I want to pick up on straight away. The first thing I noticed is that when I watched it was that Wirt didn't seem 100% sure why they were in the woods. Number one, which I found to be an interesting fact. He didn't seem 100% sure how they got there, which flagged as odd to me. Because if you get yourself lost, you know how you got lost usually. You don't just sort of go, "Oh, I'm lost." You know what I mean? It's usually you're trying to get somewhere, you take a wrong turn or whatever, and then you're lost. So I find that strange. I found that strange watching it initially. I noticed that he was quite surprised that the bird could talk. So the absurdness of the world they seem to find themselves in seems new to them, I thought, or at least to Wirt.
Yeah, but they seem pretty accepting of it quickly, don't they?
Yes. But he does initially note birds don't talk. So
yeah, that's scary. Suggesting they're like from
elsewhere.
They're not in a world where that's common. So they're in
Correct.
like you or I suddenly being in a woods where birds are talking.
Yeah, precisely. And I think what's interesting is if you listen to the setting, let's not listen to the setting, listen to the narrator describe the setting in the opening. There's a sort of narration at the beginning, and he refers to it as the unknown, where long forgotten stories are revealed to those who travel through the wood. So there's, they're traveling through whatever this place is. And I think the setting is actually kind of partly the star of the show. It's very atmospheric. Everything from the music to the visuals are so distinct. I think this show oozes atmosphere, like at every angle. I don't know if you want to sort of pass some thoughts on that.
I agree.
Very good.
No,
Very good.
Yeah, I think the color palette has a big thing with that. I think
Yes.
It's a very woodland, dark, mysterious color palette that runs throughout, even things that would traditionally maybe be brighter, such as the frog, for example, and the kind of the way they, animate things like the inside of the house, the fire. It's all done with this quite musty color palette, which is really effective,
especially when combined with the quite excessive use of shadows and lighting. Like it's all very dark and flickery and by candlelight, which I think is
for example, with the dog, like I couldn't work out whether the beast until they I think they say it turned into a dog, but I couldn't work out whether it was always a dog, and maybe that was just how they were seeing it as this beastly thing because they were scared, and like things get heightened when you're scared, or whether it did turn into a dog when it was like squashed, but then he referenced, being mutated or something on a wall, and so that implies death, and like it's stuffed on the wall. Like, yeah, I didn't really. That's one of my questions.
There's a bit of
dog,
and I hint to that in this episode. If you want me to point out a missable detail,
yeah.
So
point out a missable detail.
In the early part of the episode, when they're first lost and they're looking for directions, they talk to a bird who they decide not to trust, which is reasonable. It is a talking bird after all. While Wirt is talking to the bird, you can clearly see in the bottom left-hand corner of the shot the turtle from the end of the episode walking across the log, and Greg puts the sweet on it.
Ah, yes. Yeah. I remember that.
So the suggestion, in my opinion, is that the turtle combined with the dog when it ate it sort of turned the dog that way, and the dog ate the turtle in an attempt to eat the sweet because the sweet was left on its back, and we got a clear impression that the dog liked the sweets.
So the turtle and sweet combo turned the dog into the beast?
No, I think the turtle turned the dog into the beast, but the only reason the dog ate the turtle is because it had a sweet on it. Does that make sense?
Right. Okay,
so essentially, we're dealing with Chris, a magic turtle. I mean, I'm not going to. No, I don't know if you quite describe it that way, but my point is, I think when the dog ate the turtle, that's what sort of transformed it. Because you'll notice that when it fell into the water wheel on the side of the thing and it got squeezed, it spat out the turtle and then transformed back into a normal dog. So I think the implication is that it ate the turtle, not intentionally. It was trying to eat the sweet on its back. And that transformed it.
Okay.
You could infer that from the imagery you're seeing anyway.
So what I'm learning is don't eat turtles that you find in the woods?
Yeah, well, not even a normal-looking turtle, really. It was like a sort of like black, shadowy creature. It wasn't like it wasn't like green and like with a clear, defined shell. It looked like a shadow creature. It didn't even look quite like a turtle, did it? Really, it was like pure black.
I mean, it's certainly not a turtle I'd have eaten.
No,
I must admit.
No, you'd have probably.
But I don't like.
You'd have been like, you got a green one.
And I'd assume turtles taste a bit like fish.
I don't know, Chris. I've never eaten turtle.
I just assume, like, I don't. Yeah, that would be my assumption, as opposed to like gamey or particularly meaty.
Moving on from the turtle. I mean, Any thoughts on that as a sort of logic for the? I mean, does that make sense to you, or do you think that there's more to it than that?
I mean, at this stage, I'm not expecting it to. But, yeah, there's the forest filled with dark creatures that impact you and turn you evil, maybe something along those lines. So they have to beat the evil creatures to make it out the woods, resist.
Sure, I mean that is
temptation,
kind of
maybe.
I suppose that's the question I have for you. Is it what do you think the sort of story is episode to episode? I mean, I guess the goal is getting home, getting out the woods. That was my assumption after the first episode.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's just every episode there's an obstacle, and those obstacles slowly piece together a bigger story. What that bigger story is at the moment, I'm not sure.
In terms of the characters, did you find them particularly likable, or I don't know? But like, we only met 3 major characters really: Greg, Wirt, and the Woodsman. Like, what did you do you feel like you learnt much about them, or do you feel like they're still kind of a bit?
I found Greg funny. I found Wirt quite personable. I guess, I'm a sucker for what appears to be unrequited love, and he seems to be pining. And the spooky old man played the part of the spooky old man. The characters at this stage aren't jumping out at me, but equally I'm not bored by them or or annoyed by them. Yeah, they're fine. I'm way more intrigued about the story though, and the setting and what's going on than I am invested in the characters.
Well, I don't know if you picked up.
Is that
on
not fair? Where were you at this stage? Were you?
No,
you're more of a character guy than I am, so.
Yeah, well, I kept wondering how the story and the characters were going to come together. That's where I was, because I liked the characters enough. I didn't find them annoying or anything like that. I could see somebody finding Greg annoying, to be honest with you, but I didn't personally. I thought he was quite funny, but I could imagine somebody finding him a bit irritating. I could actually imagine somebody finding Wirt a bit whiny, to be honest with you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
I didn't. I liked them. I found them quite engaging, but I didn't. I wasn't attached to the characters yet. But I was sort of in my head going, I don't know how I reconcile a story about a big spooky magic woods that they're lost in with some sort of character development, because I think to me the best, and this is just at this stage, keep in mind I'm talking about, because to me the best stories are the ones where the sort of character progression and arc and the plot are sort of, they're not the same, but they're on parallel paths. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So they're making the same sort of stops, and they're intersecting with each other, and one is pushing the other in different directions. Do you know what I mean? The character informs the story informs the character. And I just kept thinking, I don't know how this setting brings out anything from these characters. The hint I got that I really liked, that gave me hope that it was going in a direction that might lead to some really interesting character work, was that moment at the end where Wirt tries to pin the blame a little bit on Greg, and the Woodsman literally sort of turns around and says, you're the older child. You're responsible for you and your brother's actions. And I found that to be an interesting notion, that like we were already sort of very hintingly but teaching a character a lesson and saying you need to take responsibility for your choices. You cannot continue to just blame your brother.
Which makes me think maybe the reason they're in the woods is something to do with him. There's a...
Sure.
That line has more meaning, I think, than is apparent at the moment.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking. And also the line he had about my heart's in pieces strewn about the graveyard of my lost love, which is something he uttered in an earlier part of the episode.
So you're saying it's something to do with death?
Yeah, and then he said, a boat winding along a river, drifting away from where I want to be, who I want to be. So it suggests he's quite a deep philosophical...
So you're saying it's something to do with a river?
Yeah, you got me. You figured it out. But my point, I suppose, is clearly Wirt is a very thoughtful character, and he's also quite poetic in the way he speaks. Which is an interesting trait to give a character in a kids show. I also love that this kind of really isn't a kids show. This is like This is like quite artful for a kids show, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's going to go quite deep as well. I think it has to, because otherwise, why would there be so much fuss about it? Maybe he's not a kid. Maybe he's an adult remembering being a kid, or his interpretation of memories. I don't know.
Interesting thought. Another sort of potentially missable detail is in that an earlier part of the episode, not the earlier part, sorry, the intro to the episode, there's several shots of seemingly random people and places. One of the shots has a young girl with a dog, and it's the dog from the episode. And there's another shot where in the background the woodsman is chopping wood.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if you could potentially infer from that some of the people in the intro may appear later on as well.
Yeah, which would probably be my assumption anyway. But yeah, it certainly seems that way from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I thought that was a nice little detail. What do you think's going on? So there's two things. There's a couple of things the woodsman said that I think are of note. And this is probably the last sort of thing I'll sort of quiz you on, and I'll just get some sort of final thoughts because I'm running out of things to talk about. But there's three things the woodman said that I thought were of interest, other than the thing about responsibility. The first is when he said that they're more lost than they realise. I found that to be interesting. The beast, he described it as the death of hope, which I thought was a very specific way to describe it. Like, that's not the description you give for a monster. That's the description you give to a dementor. So I thought that was quite, interesting. And then the third thing was that he talked about quite desperately getting oil for his lantern and how it was his burden. And I found his eagerness to get the thing for the lantern and his dismay at losing the oil for the lantern when it smashed to be interesting, and potentially I was thinking, is this something that's going to come back?
I mean, it's all very death-like, isn't it? The death of hope, the graveyard of my love, the dark symbols, the beast. It's all pretty
death
related.
Yeah.
And
it is quite grim. Yeah, burden of my what was it? But it's my burden, the lantern.
Yeah, but burden makes me think of the chains on Marley's Ghost in A Christmas Carol.
Yeah, it's very evocative imagery, isn't it?
It's all very ghost and death-like.
Yeah, like I said, the imagery of it is just really evocative, and it does. Again, it does feel artier than most cartoons. That's for sure.
Yeah, and if it is going down that route, that's it's bold for a children's cartoon. But then having a children's cartoon that's like a mini series is bold. Like, where did this air? What did this air on?
This was Cartoon Network, I believe.
Wow.
I think so. I mean, you know what? I'm going to quickly double check that because I don't recall myself ever challenging that notion. So if I've proven wrong here, I may very well be. I think originally it was Cartoon Network. I think it's really brave of them to have commissioned like a little mini series and just gone, well, we'll just do that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think that's a really cool idea. And to not, as far as I'm aware from what you've said, there's been no sequel or anything. It's been one complete story.
Yeah, one complete story. I think they did a couple of spin-off comics that they weren't particularly, they weren't particularly like a big thing. They were.
I think there's an obvious theory, but I feel bad because it's become obvious. I feel like you've not given me this theory, but you've pointed stuff out which all points in an obvious direction. But is it too... Can I say a theory on episode 1? What if I'm wrong? I look like a dick, but...
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason why you...
Well...
If you're putting pieces together and you're starting to... In the course of our discussion, then yeah, I mean...
Well, it's the graveyard, the beast, the burden. I mean, it's all sounding pretty purgatory-like.
Right.
It's all sounding like... something's happened, they're in this sort of purgatory world, and if they meet the beast, that's the devil in hell, and if they get out the woods, that's coming out the other side, being alive again.
Mm-hmm.
It's very coma, life on Mars esque.
Mm. Yeah,
And that's
theory.
why the woodsman is trapped in there. But why would he have to get the oil? But get the oil, find the light is what made me think of that. The fact that they're surprised, but they don't remember how they got there, suggests some sort of accident. They're suddenly in this world. They know things shouldn't talk, suggesting they're from our world.
Mm-hmm.
It's all sounding very purgatory-like, Daniel.
Yeah.
But I feel bad, because if that's right, I feel like you're going to get yelled at in the comments, because you pointed me in the direction of those things.
I pointed out details that are within the episode. Nothing more. If you
don't tell me, Dan. Tell the commenters below.
I shall. I've just had a quick glance actually, and I've just found out that one of the episodes was partially penned by Pendleton Ward, who created Adventure Time. I did not know that. Didn't know he'd helped out.
So was it cartoon? Did you confirm? Was it?
Yes. Sorry, I didn't say it on air, but I did. Yeah, I didn't say it on the podcast, but I did Google it, and it is it's Cartoon Network.
Cool.
Last question, I suppose, actually, very quickly. One last thing. Any thoughts? Because they very purposefully at the end showed that the bird was still sort of watching them as they were all leaving.
Archangel.
Sure. Fits into your theory. It's a pretty tight theory, isn't it? You've managed to make a lot of the stuff fit very quickly.
I just it's just a logical way to put those pieces together.
Yeah.
But if it is purgatory, that's fucking bold.
Yeah, and if it isn't, then they're borrowing a lot of the ideas and symbolism that you might associate with it.
Yeah.
Because you've not come to that apropos of nothing. You've put that.
No.
Yeah, you've put that together. You know.
Yeah, and more so than any other, like, it really is running over those phrases. I think it helps that you use the word lost. And then, like, obviously, making me think of the final season of Lost. And then, like, graveyard, death, da-da-da-da-da. The death of hope as well, because the hope would be that you'd make it out, the coma, go back to the real world. But the beast is the death of hope, meaning it's the devil of some kind.
That's what I think this 30 minutes has completely reaffirmed why I love this show, because I think it is it does something different to Steven Universe to make it brilliant. It is brilliant, but it's brilliant for very different reasons. I think this is like art. It's so thoughtful, and it's so intricate, and the phrasings are all so poetic, and the symbolism is so evocative that it's like what I imagine if somebody made a painting into a short story. Like, I don't know, it's hard to explain.
But that's because they don't have to. It's 10 episodes. They presumably Cartoon Network didn't commission 3 and then the other 7, so it's a complete story. A painting, it's like a painting because a painting is the painting. It doesn't need to worry about getting people invested, getting ratings. It can just tell the story it's telling.
Yeah, and it's not at all worried about longevity. They don't have to go, what's the story in 11 episodes? And I think they don't have to worry about that because they're never getting that far. The reason you're probably drawn to that now is because, now we're in a world where everyone is after the franchise. Everyone is after, even the most beautiful, complete stories are getting spun into anthology series. True Detective, American Horror Story, Fargo, Imagine if True Detective didn't have that second season. Yeah. Well, there's a third one coming, Chris. There's a third one coming.
Well, hey, dude's had more time this time. So,
yes, he has.
But hopefully it'll be better. But, but imagine how good it would have been if that was it. And I think that's very rare these days, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And, it's why I'm so fascinated. It's why I'm so enjoying the... We're 4 or 5 episodes into The Handmaid's Tale, and it feels like that's a story, and it almost worries me that there's like a third season of that, on its way, because I'm like, I feel like they're either going to tell one story very, very slowly.
Yeah. Well, I will say that The Handmaid's Tale, I think, in many ways, improves upon the book, because the TV show, and it's very rare I say that. It's a discussion for our other podcast, for Nothing But Static, but The Handmaid's Tale is fascinating because the first series sort of mimics the book, but it sort of goes off the beaten path towards the end of the first series, and then it's sort of forging its own way in the second. Still good, but and I would argue in some ways better than the book, because it manages to fill in the world a bit more than the book did.
Forging its own way in the second, do you wish it was just one series that stuck more to the book and was a complete story like this?
Part of me does, but
because that's fine now. But you're only on the second.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's true. But the second season has been good, so I sort of think even if the third is bad, I got a good second season out of it. Whereas with True Detective, it immediately got bad.
but if someone was to say to you right now, "Oh, The Handmaid's Tale is going to go for 7 years," would you be going, "Ooh"?
Yes, a little. I think.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's a great show, though.
Okay, cool. Well, there you go, then.
So that's the lesson of this, guys. Go watch Handmaid's Tale. No, I'm kidding. Over the Garden Wall, discussion of episode 1, which we never even said the title of. It's the Old Grist Mill, which is presumably the name of the mill in which they reside for a bit before a monster attacks.
Okay, cool. Yeah. We don't have a name for this yet, but we will by episode 2. So you'll already know the name of this. And we're
not going to do what we did on Steven University, where it took us 10 episodes to think of the name. Because if we do that here, we'll never say it on air, which will be ridiculous. So we'll definitely have a title for whatever this is by the end of the next one. But yeah, there you go. That's I think we'll call it there, Chris.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for listening. If you're new to our channel,
I've enjoyed our discussion. I think it's made me appreciate the episode a lot more. So I'm going into episode 2 more excited than I was at the end of episode 1.
Oh, that's good. There you go. I think that's one of the reasons I chose to bring up some of the details and some of the phrasings and stuff, because I thought that would really help you pick out, because it's stuff that I didn't 100% get when I watched the episode the first time, and I'm glad I'm getting to really get to the nitty-gritty of it now on the second viewing. I remember a lot less of it than I thought, though, which is interesting.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you're getting something from.
To be fair, it was 2014. It was 4 years ago, so that's a fair excuse. But yeah, thanks very much for listening. If you guys enjoyed this, obviously subscribe, because we're going to be doing all 10 episodes. The schedule of which might be a little bit up and down, because it's going to very much depend on what's happening with Steven Universe. Because if new episodes of that air, it's going to sort of potentially interrupt the flow of this, depending on when we're airing this and what that is. But yeah, stick with us. We'll hopefully be explaining when next episodes are due in the description below. But if you like this, subscribe.
Yeah, bar random episodes of Steven Universe dropping, it should be every Thursday for 10 weeks.
That's the theoretical schedule, which I'm reluctant to commit to, just in case. But yeah, that is what we're hoping to do with this. But feel free to subscribe, hit the bell if you want to be notified when the videos come. Do be aware we are also releasing Steven Universe content still, sort of hiatus stuff on Tuesdays. And yeah, if you're interested in that and watch Steven Universe, of course, feel free to head over to Steven University. There's a playlist for it on this channel that has all 150 odd episodes of us chatting about it. And amuse yourself when you first get to the playlist and notice that the very most recent episode is probably about 50 minutes long, and look back and notice that the very first episode is about 13.
Well, we've gone, before we started this, it was like 15, 20 minutes, and here we are at 40.
Yeah, well, you know what? I didn't want to say it, but once I started writing notes, I was like, there's actually a fair bit to discuss, I think. So yeah, I think that's good. But yeah, thanks very much for listening, everyone, and we will speak to you hopefully next week when we discuss episode 2. So yeah, that's everything for this week. I've been Dan Doolan.
I've been Chris Billingham.
And we'll speak to you next week as we discuss Hard Times at the Huskin Bee.
Is this podcast the kind of podcast that has an extra bit at the end, or?
I think we've just established it does now.
Cool.
That's not awkward at all.
I'm reveling in it. I like the awkwardness.
I said episode 2, didn't I? I meant to say chapter 2. These are chapters, Chris.
Wow, you've just got some more angry comments in the comment box.
Yes, I did.